Okay, welcome back everyone to our water fluoridation investigation. I have been super busy lately. I went to the Virginia Department of Health quarterly meeting and spoke. You get 2 minutes to speak over there. Shortly after I spoke, there was a 15-minute break, and I had a really good conversation with the new health commissioner. He had a lot of questions and wanted to know a little bit more about what I was discussing. So I'll have to fill you guys in further detail in a later video. I've also been going to the Library of Virginia and unearthing a lot of these old records in order to get a better grasp of what was being said by the various players back in the 1950s and 1960s. So I'd like to share with you some of that information, and really in this video I would like to explain to you all how, in my opinion, based on reading the law, that there's no locality in the state of Virginia that has the lawful authority to put fluoride in the drinking water. If you guys are just joining me, fluoride is defined as a drug by the FDA. Now, people have a hard time with this because the FDA does not regulate the fluoride that's in our drinking water, but legally speaking, this is a drug. This is defined as a drug. So when they are putting this into our drinking water, they're mass medicating the public, okay? So if you're unfamiliar with that, I encourage you to go back and watch one of the later videos. But today I want to kind of power through the topic of what is the legal authority to put fluoride in the drinking water. And you will see after I present all of the information that there is none. If you should disagree with me, or perhaps maybe I got something wrong in this video, feel free to leave a comment below, and I will correct it in a later video, or address whatever it is, hopefully in a later video. Okay, so let's get started. The first place that we're going to start is going to be a newspaper article discussing how the state has a new policy where they are recommending water fluoridation. Back in the 1950s, and I would argue kind of now, people saw the state health department as some sort of god, right? They see them as just knowing all, and whatever they say, the people at the lower level are just going to just obey and do what they're told. So let's read the newspaper article, and then I'll explain a little bit further. Okay, so it's going to be an exciting video. Let's get started. Here we are at Virginia Chronicle, thanks to the Library of Virginia. Richmond News Leader number 16654, and the date is November 9th, 1950. And you can see that the title of this article is State Backs Water Supply Fluoridation. So let's zoom into this and start reading. Let's look closer. It says, Virginia has adopted a policy approving the use of sodium fluoride in drinking water to combat teeth decay. The announcement came today from Richard Messer, director of the State Health Department's Division of Engineering. That's who was handling everything prior to Virginia Department of Health. It was the State Department's Division of Engineering. In a statement of his department's attitude, Messer left actual use of the chemical up to localities. In the case of Richmond, fluoridation is a distinct possibility at best. it was indicated today. The department accepts the principle of fluoridation of public water supplies. The statement read, providing such fluoridation can be done under properly controlled conditions. Procedure to follow by communities wanting fluoride water was outlined by the state health department. Here are the steps. The governing body of the community concerned must officially request approval from the Division of Engineering for fluoridation of its supply. Now, there's a few things that I want you to focus in right here. One, they say that this is a policy. Okay, so we're going to discuss that. And two, what was the other word that they said? His attitude, right? In a statement of his department's attitude. These are the words that we want to focus in on. So let's go out of this. Okay, guys. So did you notice how they use the word policy and attitude? I mean, come on. This does not work on me. I have been watching First Amendment audit videos for some time now. Those of you who may not be familiar, there are a variety of folks that will go around and they will record in public spaces and get confronted with city employees, county employees, or so forth. And the county employee will say, well, you can't record in here. It's our policy, right? Policies do not supersede the Virginia Constitution. They do not supersede the U.S. Constitution, okay? A policy doesn't hold the weight of law, okay? And I could not help but laugh when I saw that the language that's being used by this engineering division, I could not help but laugh seeing that they use the word policy. This is very manipulative. It tricks the public into thinking that this is law when it is not, okay? It is not law, not by any stretch of the imagination. So I've written something up in order to articulate this a little bit better than what I've done so far. So let's jump into that so you can really, have a deep understanding that policies are not laws, okay? Our government does not get to just write policies and bypass the legislative process. Let me give you an example. Let's say the government decided we're going to have a policy that every time the Board of Supervisors starts a brand new meeting, they need to tap their head 10 times and say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? You cannot do that. That is not enforceable. It doesn't hold the weight of law, okay? Imagine if you went to a public library and they said, well, it's our policy that every time you come into the library, you have to clap your hands 5 times and then bow to the librarians. It doesn't work that way. Policies are not laws. But back then, people thought that the health department and the states were some sort of gods, and whatever they said held the weight of law, right? And that's what they wanted the public to believe. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I wrote something up that I think will be very helpful. So let's get into it. Okay, guys, here we are. Number one, deference to state health expertise. If you're not familiar, deference simply means that the localities are deferring to the state health department for expert guidance, okay? In the mid 20th century, public health agencies like the Engineering Division of the Virginia Department of Health were treated as authoritative experts. When such an agency issued a policy saying fluoridation was safe and beneficial, local officials often interpreted this as an implicit green light or a signal that the state endorsed and would defend the practice. Even if the policy was not a formal regulation or statute, it carried practical weight. So even though they did not have the lawful authority to do it, because the health department set a policy, localities went along with it. This is a problem. This is not lawful. Number two, broad public health powers of the local level. Many localities relied on general statutory language like authority to operate a waterworks. We're going to get into that. Authority to protect public health. We're going to get into that. Instead of asking, is there explicit authorization for fluoridation, they asked, is this reasonably related to public health? Because fluoridation was framed as preventing tooth decay, they treated it as falling within those broad powers. Number three, lack of early legal challenges. In the 1950s, fluoridation spread quickly across the U.S., and courts were generally deferential when cases did arise, meaning the courts deferred to the health department, or they deferred to the city council, or they deferred to the legislature. The courts did not actually figure out for themselves if fluoride was safe or if, what the adverse events were. They said, well, your politicians voted to put this in the drinking water, so we're going to defer to the politicians. Courts in multiple states upheld fluoridation as a valid public health measure under police powers that created a reinforcing loop. State says it's good policy. Recognize that this was policy. Other cities adopt it. Courts uphold it elsewhere. Localities assume it must be legally sound, and that's the problem. Number four, confusion between policy and regulation. And we're still dealing with this issue of policy or recommendation language. So there is a difference between a lawful regulation and a policy. A key issue in your question, a policy is not the same as a legally binding regulation adopted under an administrative procedural act. But in practice, local officials often didn't distinguish between internal agency policy versus formally promulgated regulations. Treated anything coming from the state health department as quasi-law, right? And that's what's going on. They don't have the lawful authority, but they want to pretend. Number five, absence of the Dillon Rule analysis. In a state like Virginia, the Dillon Rule requires that local governments have express authority or authority necessarily implied from statute. And we'll get into this if you're unfamiliar. Many localities likely never rigorously applied a Dillon rule analysis to fluoridation. Instead, they assumed if the state health department supports it, it must be allowed. That's not the same as having actual statutory authority. Okay? Number 6, political and social momentum. Fluoridation was heavily promoted nationwide, including by federal public health agencies by the early 50s. It was seen as modern, scientific, and progressive. Opposing it was often marginalized. So if you opposed it, you were cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. That environment made local officials less likely to question the legal foundation. So essentially, they name called you, said, you don't understand science, or don't you trust the science? And so they bullied the localities into putting the fluoride in the drinking water without the legal authority to do so, because they did it under pressure. I mean, this is schoolyard bullying, essentially. Bottom line, localities didn't rely on the 1950 policy because it legally authorized fluoridation. They relied on it because it signaled state approval, fit within broad public health powers, and was rarely challenged on strict legal grounds at the time. But strictly speaking, a policy alone does not create legal authority, especially under a strict Dillon rule framework. Okay, let's go out of this. Okay, so it's totally ridiculous, right? Think about this. Imagine if you had a gang of drug dealers on the street corner and they say, we recommend that this block starts putting drugs into the drinking water. Okay, the entire block knows that this gang, if you mess with them, there's going to be problems. So they say, the block says, okay, we're going to start putting drugs in the drinking water. How would you like for us to do this? And this gang of drug dealers says, well, we want you to only go through us, okay? So we're going to set up a few rules. We're going to call them policies. And our policy is that you ask us for permission first. And our policy is that you pass an ordinance. And our policy is that you speak to a doctor and a dentist. Okay. So we control your block. We dictate this. We say it's good. And we're going to dictate the terms and conditions. Now, this gang of drug dealers, you first have to ask the question, do they even have the authority to do what they're doing? Absolutely not. But for some reason, when you have the Virginia Department of Engineering, you have these people wearing nice suits and they have engineering degrees, people think, oh, let's listen to them. Let's listen to their policy. Who cares if it's not lawful? Who cares if they're recommending that they put drugs into the drinking water? I mean, these folks are essentially glorified drug pushers, right? They're pushing drugs on the population and they are dressing it up as if it's something lawful by saying, yeah, we're pushing these drugs on you, but we're going to say you have to have an ordinance. We're going to say that you have to speak to a dentist. We're going to say that you have to do these certain things. So it kind of gives the illusion to this being lawful when it is not, right? So that's a big problem. And I do not believe that this policy language would hold up in this day and time, because everyone knows that policy is not law. But back then, I guess that was good enough. It tricked the public. So anyway, I hope that kind of covers this first section regarding how kind of the first introduction. And let's look at one other newspaper clipping, and then we're gonna move on to the next section. Okay, so here we go. We are, guys. So this is Virginia Chronicle, Library of Virginia, Richmond News Leader, number 16616, September 26, 1950. Fluoride use sought. Lynchburg, so this is Lynchburg, Virginia, September 26. Permission to add fluoride to the drinking water here is to be asked from the state health department. The Lynchburg Academy of Medicine recently approved the project after a recommendation from the dentist of the area. So a dentist recommended it. Then we have the Lynchburg Academy of Medicine said, yeah, this is fantastic. And then they ask the state health department for permission to put it in the drinking water. And then I think Lynchburg may have done an ordinance, and then they went ahead and put it into the water. So you can see, everyone, it looks like it's lawful. It looks very official, doesn't it? Well, just because a corner drug dealer recommends that I put it into my drinking water, and that I've got all of these white coat people giving the green light, does that make it legal? No, it does not make it legal. Okay. So this is the beginning conversations to make it appear that this is done on the up and up, but it's not. Let's jump over now to, I believe it's 1951 Virginia Department of Health meeting minutes, where they essentially put into place this policy. Remember, policy is not the same as law. Okay, this is very different. It basically means nothing, but it's done, again, to manipulate the public, because that's what the health department does. They manipulate the public. Okay, let's get into this. Okay, here we go, guys. This is December 13th, 1951. This is the Virginia Department of Health meeting minutes. This is the book of minutes that is located at the Library of Virginia in the Archives Center. So it says, Statement of Policy for Fluoridation. The State Board of Health approves and encourages the fluoridation of public water supplies for the partial control of tooth decay upon assurance that there is compliance with specific conditions. These are to be made in writing to the State Department of Health. 1. Endorsed by the local medical and dental groups concerned. 2. Approval by local health officials. 3. Evidence of public demand as shown by an ordinance or resolutions by local governing bodies. And it actually had to be done by ordinance. 4. An application by the individual, firm, institution, organization, or municipal corporation involved for a written permit and obtaining same before beginning fluoridation. 5. Development of plans, specifications, operating procedures, and methods of supervision in conformity with requirements to be determined for each individual installation by the State Department of Health. Now, this is a policy. Okay, so you can see that the government was going to do these illegal acts anyway, right? So they can say, well, we're going to let them do what they're going to do, and we can either do it and just, not have any sort of guardrails on this illegal act, or we can put guardrails on the illegal act. So that's what they did. They came up with this policy, and it appears that they kind of enforced this policy for a little bit anyway. And then it was just like, okay, enough time has gone by. Just let everyone do what they're going to do. So this type of policy does two things. So just like now, a lot of people do not fully understand how the government works. Back then, they didn't really understand how the government worked either. And so if you were just, a mere peasant and you saw, oh, they're doing, having doctors come in and having the dentist and there's ordinances and everything, then the public will just lap it up and think that this is done legally, right? That this is a fair and legal process, when it is not. Okay. Now, the folks that pushed back, and apparently there were a lot of people that was pushing back in Virginia, they knew that this, you can put lipstick on a pig and it's still a pig kind of a thing. So this is the equivalent. They're just dressing up this illegal act, and it's still an illegal act. So it appears that there was pushback, right? Hey, guys, this does not correct the problem. So this is 1951, right? December 13th, 1951. And we're going to see what happened in 1952. Okay, so in 1951, they seem to feel like that the state health department is going to get its way, and there's going to be a law that's going to be passed in 1952 that would allow the localities to put fluoride in the drinking water. They had this proposed policy that I think they were hoping they're going to get their way, and then they can have an official regulation. And there was a variety of other things that they were going to get put into place to essentially they were gearing up. So, but it never actually got put into place. Like another one that I saw in the Library of Virginia was that there had to be certain parameters to put fluoride in the drinking water, meaning the population had to exceed a certain size, and just a variety of other things that they were gearing up, but it never actually took, right? Just how this policy never became an official regulation that had legal statutory backing. That was the same with a variety of other things that I was looking at. So I'm not going to kind of go into those right now unless you guys are interested, but I think I'll just continue to move forward. So the next piece of information I want you guys to look at with me is this proposed 1952 law. So, okay, they want to do fluoride. People say this is not legal. So several Virginia legislators said, okay, you caught us. You caught us. See, in 1950, there's a law, and it still remains into effect today, that requires pure water. Okay, the language means that you remove contaminants from the drinking water to make the water safe to drink. So I would imagine that what was happening is everyone's shouting, hey, this is a violation of state law. So the legislator said, okay, Again, y'all caught us. So let's go ahead and put in this law that would make it lawful for people to put fluoride in the drinking water in the state of Virginia, right? So let's take a look at that proposed law. I say proposed because it never actually got turned into a law. So let's get into it, okay? We have Senate Bill number 106, offered January 21st, 1952. Remember that policy was December 13th, 1951. So this is shortly after that policy. It says a bill to authorize cities having water supplies to fluoridate the water and to provide for regulations in connection thereof. This bill never got turned into a law, okay? Now, here's some questions that you want to ask yourself. Remember, they were already adding fluoride to the drinking water by 1952, several localities. So, if it was already lawful to put fluoride in the drinking water, then why did the legislators feel that they needed this bill? Right? I believe, based on all of the information that I unearthed, that they knew that it was not legal to put fluoride in the drinking water. The 1950 law requires pure water, right? So everybody's shouting that you don't have the legal authority. The law requires pure water. So in order to overcome what I believe they knew was illegal, they thought, okay, let's pass this law in order to make it legal for the localities to put fluoride in the drinking water, and let's pass this law so the health department's policies can become a lawful regulation, okay? So let's go on and see what they had to say. It says, be it enacted by the General Assembly of Virginia, each city of this Commonwealth which maintains and operates a water supply system may chemically treat the water therein so as to dissolve in such water fluorine, which is funny, to a concentration as established by regulations adopted by the State Board of Health. And then they go on to say the State Board of Health is directed to prescribe by regulations, right? So this state law would have gave the Virginia Department of Health, the State Board of Health, the authority to make regulations, okay? Remember, this never got turned into a law, which means that localities do not have the lawful authority to fluoridate the drinking water, and it means that VDH does not have the lawful authority to make regulations regarding water fluoridation. They don't have the lawful authority to make regulations that may require water fluoridation. They do not have the lawful authority to make regulations that recommend water fluoridation. Okay, this law, this bill, if it had gotten turned into a law, would have made what everybody's doing lawful, okay? But it did not happen, which means that this is not lawful. The State Board of Health is directed to prescribe by regulations adopted and promulgated by it the manner in which fluoridation of water shall be accomplished in accordance with provisions of this bill right here that would have been turned into a law hereof, and the concentration. So to dictate the concentration, they were doing 1 parts per million, and then they changed it to 0.7 parts per million being the recommendation, which shall be obtained by such fluoridation process. Copy of such regulation shall be sent to the Director of Public Works or other appropriate official of each city in this Commonwealth, and no fluoridation water system shall be approved by the Department of Health unless it complies with the regulations established by the State Board of Health, right? This never got turned into a law, which means that the General Assembly never granted any locality in Virginia to put fluoride in the drinking water. The Virginia General Assembly never granted VDH the authority to make regulations regarding water fluoridation. None of this is legal. I want to point out the previous draft of this bill. I found it to be interesting. I'll just show you the top part that's relevant. They initially had the language that said, as to dissolve in such water fluorine to a concentration beneficial to the health of the inhabitants of such city. They scratched this out, likely because they knew back then. See, fluoride is used to kill animals. It's a rat poison. They kill cockroaches. They kill lice. It's used to kill things. So I have to imagine somebody said, like, we better scratch this out because we know it harms the brain. We know it kills the enzymes. We know it kills the DNA, yada, yada, yada. So, like, we can't say this because, how are we ever going to get the law passed if it says it has to benefit people? So the bill would have, or this law does not need to benefit the inhabitants. Okay, that was a word that they used back then. I've seen that a lot, be beneficial to the inhabitants. So they're just going to pass this. Doesn't matter if it helps or harms the population. Okay, so let's get out of this. Okay, so there we have it. You would think we can just pack up and call it a day. The Virginia legislature never granted localities the authority to put fluoride in the drinking water. The Virginia legislature never granted the Virginia Department of Health the authority to regulate fluoride in any way, shape, or manner. They don't have the authority to recommend it. They don't have the authority to require it. What bill were we left with? Well, I mentioned in 1950 there was a bill, and it remains in place to this day, regarding pure water. Okay, so that's what VDH has to follow, pure water, and that's what the localities have to follow, is pure water. So let's go ahead and take a look at that bill that everybody should be following in the state of Virginia, but they are not. So let's get into it, shall we? Here we are, guys. This is the law that everyone should be following. 32.1-170 regulations. It says the regulations of the board governing waterworks, water supplies, and pure water shall be designed to protect the public health and promote the public welfare, and shall include criteria and procedures to accomplish these purposes. Now, what is the plain reading of this law? Plain language reading of this law. What is the spirit of the law? Ask yourself when I'm reading this to you, do you get the sense that the spirit of this law means that VDH can recommend that drugs be put into the drinking water, or that fluoride can go into the drinking water? The answer is no. Remember, because this law says that the regulations of the board that govern waterworks, so the board is the Virginia Department of Health board, that governs waterworks, water supplies, and pure water, shall be designed to protect. So, and pure water shall be designed to protect public health and promote the public welfare. So, all of the regulations that the board comes up with must be in line with this state law. And they go on to describe what they mean. So it says the regulations, so the Virginia Department of Health regulations may include without limitation, number 1, requirements and procedures for the issuance of permits required by this article. So they can give out permits. Fantastic. Number 2, minimum health and aesthetic standards for pure water. Now, there's a definition of pure water that we're going to take a look at. And you'll see it doesn't involve fluoridation. Number 3, minimum standards for the quality of water which may be taken into a waterworks. Number 4, criteria for the siting, siting, design, and construction of water supplies and waterworks. Okay, fantastic. Number 5, requirements for inspections, examinations, and testing of raw or finished water. The finished water is what you and I are drinking, in case you guys didn't know. Number 6, requirements that the owners submit 1, regular samples of water for bacteriological, chemical, radiological, physical, or other test. Number 2, the results of such test from such laboratory as may be acceptable to the commissioner. So you have to test the water and you have to do it in a proper lab. Number 7, requirements for record keeping and reporting. So you have to keep good records. Number 8, the methodology. I always have a hard time pronouncing this word for some reason. It scrambles my brain. Instead of saying methodology, methodology. I don't know why. Methodology for determining the waterworks operation fee authorized by 32.1-171.1. Okay. Number 9, requirements and criteria for the development and maintenance of an emergency management plan for each community public water supplies for the provision of pure water during an extended power outage. Yeah, well, that would have been nice during the January 6th water crisis in Richmond. That failed royally. Number 10, such other provisions as may be necessary to guarantee a supply of pure water. And then this essentially says that if you have fewer than 2,000 people, then you might be exempt from some of these requirements. So now let's go to the definition, because that's really what we're focusing in on, the definition of pure water. So you can see nowhere in here can anyone construe this to mean that the board can regulate fluoride or drugs, right? Fluoride is defined as a drug by the FDA. Just because the FDA is being derelict in their duties and they refuse to regulate fluoride in the drinking water, nonetheless, it's defined as a drug. So people need to kind of get over that. I'm kind of tired of hearing that one. So let's go to the definitions. Here we go. So definitions, this is going to be 32.1-167 definitions. And look at there, I already have it highlighted. So pure water, this is where we're at. Pure water means water fit for human consumption that is 1, sanitary and normally free of minerals, organic substances, and toxic agents. Now, hydrofluorosilicic acid is a toxic agent in excess of reasonable amounts and adequate in quantity and quality for the minimum health requirements of the person served. So you can see nowhere in the definition can you construe that that VDH can recommend that drugs go in the drinking water, or that VDH may require that drugs go into the drinking water. So let's go out of this. Okay, so anyone who has a second grade education can comprehend that nowhere in that law does it authorize VDH to recommend water fluoridation. It does not authorize localities the authority to put drugs into the drinking water, right? I mean, I know third graders who have better reading comprehension than some folks over in our government. Okay, let's just say that. Or could it be that they possess reading comprehension? It's just that they decide that they want to put drugs in our drinking water without the lawful authority to do so. This is considered an ultra vires act, right? It's also problematic with, I don't know, the Constitution, but forget about that pesky Constitution, right? Forget about that. So we are finally kind of, we're about halfway through with this. So I hope that you guys are hanging in there and you're learning something, because this is painful. I recognize that, but so many people have such a hard time when I just jump to the end and say, you don't have the lawful authority and here's why. They don't get it. So perhaps if I kind of slowly walk everyone through this, then everyone can kind of understand that our government is corrupt, right? I mean, we all know this. So what do I want to get into next? I think what I would like to do is now jump over to this recommendation that Virginia Department of Health is engaging in that's not proper, right? Let's look at 12 VAC 5-590-930 fluorid. Oh, you know what? Hold on a second. Before we look at 12 VAC 5-590-930 fluoridation, the current language of the regulation, I last week unearthed the original regulation. This original may require water fluoridation. So this is important because Henrico County, they said, we don't want fluoride in the drinking water, but the health department is forcing us. And I said, wait a minute, what are you talking about? The regulation says recommend. What do you mean the health department's forcing you? And they said, I don't know. And I was like, well, I'm sure y'all just didn't dream it up. And so what happened was there was this prior may require water fluoridation. And I wanted to figure out, how the heck did this get put on the books to begin with? This is a scandal. I lose words. This is absolutely egregious. It's a scandal. I don't know how else to put it. It is a scandal. So let's jump into, first we're going to look at the meeting minutes for 1973 from Virginia Department of Health. And then we will jump over to the may require regulation. This is sinister, and I want to get your opinion on this one. If you think that they were just confused, or did they sneak something in? Now, when we look at this, I want you to have in your mind, okay, we looked at 1951. They came up with this like policy to make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, as if the government's not corrupt. Okay. Then they were hoping to pass the law that would allow localities to put fluoride in the drinking water. That never happened. So that was in 1952. Okay, so let's fast forward to 19 1973. Let's get into it, okay? This is very exciting. It's wild. Okay, here we are, guys. So I copied this from the Book of Meeting Minutes from Virginia Department of Health. This is located at the Library of Virginia in the archives room. This is going to be page 127. Okay, this is the page number up here. It's going to be 1973. Okay, so this was the conversation that was going on in 1973. It says, Mr. Adams reported that his staff was drawing up proposed rules and regulations for public water supplies, which he felt were necessary because of the rapidly expanded number of supplies in the state and probable actions by Congress in passing a pure drinking water law. It now appears that a federal act will be approved by July 1st, 1973, which will include primary drinking water standards for medical reasons and secondary standards for aesthetic reasons. Aesthetic, so I believe what they mean is to deal with dental fluorosis, but I can't be sure. The law will provide for state enforcement, and the state must adopt regulations which are equally as stringent as the federal regulations. It is possible that the federal funds will be appropriated. Mr. Adams stated that the proposed rules and regulations were nearing final draft stage and were being reviewed by the Attorney General's office in the hope that they could be presented to the Board of Health in September. All right, let me help you guys out. So we have Mr. Adams, and he's essentially writing up waterworks regulations. This will be the first year that there's waterworks regulations for Virginia. And the reason he's doing this, Mr. Adams is writing up these waterworks regulations, is because they were going to pass the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. Okay, so he says by Congress in passing a pure water law. What he's discussing is the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. And the act would limit the amount of contaminations that can be put into the drinking water. So when he says, which will include primary drinking water standards, what they're discussing is the maximum contaminant level for various chemicals. For example, the maximum contaminant level for fluoride is 4 parts per million. And then the secondary maximum contaminant level is going to be 2 parts per million. And depending on what the contaminant is, there's a different level that's set. So they're essentially saying that the federal government is going to essentially limit the amount of contaminations that can be in the drinking water, and that the primary standards are going to be legally enforced. So you cannot go over the maximum contaminant level. Federal government is going to come in and legally, force you to be correct. Now, they go on to say that the state must adopt regulations which are equally as stringent. Now, for example, here in Virginia, the maximum contaminant level for fluoride is 4 parts per million, which is the same that they did on the federal level. In New York, the maximum contaminant level, I think it was 2 parts per million, or right around 2 parts per million. I'd have to look at my records. I did a FOIA request over there, and I learned that their maximum contaminant levels is either 2 or somewhere around 2, which I found was interesting. So they were stricter. So you could be strict, more strict. Now, I want to pop over to the 73, the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, to show you something before jumping into this next paragraph, because it'll become relevant. So just put into mind that, okay, VDH has to set up all these new waterworks regulations, and it needs to be in line with the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. So let's take a look at the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. Okay, guys, so this went into play in August of 74, and it says limitation on standard setting authority. The administrator, and this is going to be the EPA administrator, so right now I think it's Lee Zeldin. I don't know who it was back then. The administrator under this section would be prohibited from requiring the addition of any substance other than for the purposes of treating contaminants. Thus, EPA could not require the addition of fluorides or other substances to a public water system for medical purposes, nor could EPA prevent the addition of fluorides or other substances up to the maximum amount allowable under a maximum contaminant level. While EPA could not require the addition of a substance for medical purposes, the agency would have full authority to limit the addition of such a substance if necessary to prevent excessive levels from occurring or to prevent such substances from interfering with the effectiveness of any required treatment techniques. Okay, let me help you out. So, to start off, it says the administrator under this section would be prohibited from requiring the addition of any substance other than for the purposes of treating contaminants. So what he means is that the federal government cannot require water fluoridation. They cannot require fluoride. They could require, let's say, chlorine to make the water safe to drink. Yes, you're dealing with the contamination of drinking water. Fluoride is not used to treat the water, it's used to treat the people. So the federal government cannot require water fluoridation. They go on to say, thus, EPA could not require the addition of fluorides or other substances to a public water system for medical purposes. So let's say you wanted to chill out the public and put a bunch of lithium into the drinking water. The EPA cannot require that Virginia put lithium in the water. You cannot require, for a while there was a discussion, people wanted to put cholesterol drugs into the water. And so the EPA, the federal government, is forbidden from requiring any sort of drug medical intervention. Okay, so we're just dealing with the contamination of drinking waters. You cannot use the water to treat people. But what they did say is, okay, the federal government's not going to require anything. But the federal government also is not going to forbid this either. So nor could EPA prevent the addition of fluorides or other substances up to the maximum amount allowable under a maximum contaminant level. So essentially the maximum contaminant level for fluoride at this time was 4 parts per million. They said at that point it causes crippling skeletal fluorosis and severe dental fluorosis. And so a locality could put 3.9 parts per million of fluoride. So the person would, just be really jacked up, but 4 parts per million, now you're crippled. So if you're just like on the verge of being crippled, then you can go ahead and do it. If your teeth are all brown from dental fluorosis, then that's okay. You can go ahead and do it. So that's what they're saying, that they're going to essentially leave it up to the state. So for example, Indiana, the state of Indiana, I believe that they passed a law a while ago to require water fluoridation. The federal government cannot tell Indiana, you're not allowed to pass that state law. I think they're on the verge of getting rid of that law right now. So let's jump out of this. Now that you have this information, this is important because the federal government cannot require water fluoridation, and a VDH under their primacy. So the VDH derives its authority from two different places. One place being from the Safe Drinking Water Act. They got primacy, I believe, in 1976, I believe. They cannot require it under their primacy. So let's see, and we've already gone over they don't have the authority under the state law. Okay, so let's jump back into the other document. Okay, so now that you have the gist that the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act was limiting the amount of contaminations that can go in the drinking water, and they also were saying that the federal government cannot require water fluoridation. So after they had this little discussion, in their next paragraph, oops, sorry about that, guys. In the next paragraph, they say, on motion made by Dr. Haggerty, he's a longtime dentist, seconded by Dr. Hutchinson, the board instructed Mr. Adams, remember Mr. Adams was writing these regulations, to include in the regulations a requirement that fluoride be introduced into the public water supply at approved level, if not otherwise available in the natural supply, this being a method for control of dental disease accepted by all national dental organizations. Now, hold on. Wait a minute. Okay, if you recall a moment ago, I showed you that this bill up here that we looked at, the General Assembly never passed this bill. This bill never got turned into a law that would have allowed Virginia Department of Health to promulgate, meaning make regulations, right? Prescribed by regulations adopted and promulgated in the manner. They never passed this law. So VDH cannot make regulations regarding fluoridation under the current state law that requires pure water. What was that water? Remember, we're dealing with pure water. So this law does not allow VDH to make regulations regarding water fluoridation. And this law never got passed. So why are they taking a vote to require water fluoridation? They can't do it under the state law. So and we just read the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act of 74. The federal government is forbidden from requiring water fluoridation. So either the board lost their minds and did not possess reading comprehension, right? Like they got confused and they thought that the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act said it was required, in which case you don't need a vote. They did not take a vote for all of these other waterworks regulations because they're required to do it. The federal government required that they make these regulations. So you wouldn't vote on this because you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice in the matter. You're forced to do it. So why are they voting? Are they voting because they know that the federal government, they're not doing this under the Federal Safe Drink to be in compliance with the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act? I believe what they did was there was a lot of chaos that was going on with this 74 Safe Drinking Water Act. It's the first, 74 was the first year all of these waterworks regulations were being rolled out. And I believe, based on a variety of information and speaking with people, that the board, this dentist in particular, got everyone, to go ahead and vote to require water fluoridation, and they snuck it into these waterworks regulations in order to deceive Virginians, in order to deceive the localities, in order to make it seem like this is coming from the federal government. They knew they don't have a state law. We've already established that. They know they do not have statutory authority to do this. So I think that they were trying to pass it off as if this was coming down from the federal government. That's the way it seems. Either they lack reading comprehension or they're sneaking it in. Okay, so it's one or the other. Let's go to this this may require language next. Okay, here we go, guys. So this is going to be the 1974 Waterworks regulation. Currently, the Waterworks regulations are under 12 VAC 5-590. When it comes to fluoridation in particular, it's 12 VAC 5-590-930. It used to be VR 355-18-000, the Waterworks regulations. VR is Virginia Register. Now, because this Waterworks manual was so big, the health department had it located. You had to request it. It was too big to put into the Virginia Register. This in particular, this Waterworks manual, I had to request it from, I call it the warehouse, but I think it's called the Virginia State Record Center. So essentially at the Library of Virginia, they have an overflow warehouse. I think it's called the State Record Center. And so they have to request it, and it takes a week before you can get it. So this was very difficult to track down, but I eventually managed to help out the Library of Virginia and say, here's the box, and it was a process. So this Waterworks manual, Waterworks regulations, back in 1974, like I said, it's 355-18-000. This is the front. It came from the Bureau of Sanitary Engineering Department of Health, Richmond, Virginia. Okay, I think that says September. Now we're gonna go down, and I knew from looking at 1991 regulation that it was 9.09 is what it was called back then. Like I said, now it's VAC 5-590-930. So back then it was 9.09. So that's going to be located on page 107. And we are going to go down, and where's our section right here? Okay, so you can see somebody wrote in that now it's 9:30 and it used to be 9.09. And it says fluoridation, where practical and feasible, the board may require owners of waterworks to provide artificial fluoridation so as to bring the fluoride ion concentration to the optimal level as set forth in section 4.0. 4.0 essentially saying the amount of fluoride that's going to be into the drinking water. Now this language right here in particular that I just read remain the same until 2021, and then they changed it from may require to recommend. There was some other parts about fluoride that they changed throughout the years, just subtly, but that's the biggest one that we're going to focus in on. it was interesting to know that they used to have steps on how to remove fluoride from the drinking water back in the older waterworks regulations, but they no longer, I guess they, for whatever reason, they took it out, or maybe it's snuck into a different section. But anyway, this is what we're going to focus in on, is this may require portion. Now, like I said, so here in 70, so you know what's going on. You kind of, let's, forgive me for scrolling up. So first we have let's recap. First we have in 1950, we have the policy of VDH, thinks that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Okay, policy is not the equivalent as law. So everyone is bamboozled. Then fast forward to 1951, VDH comes up with this policy of you have to have an ordinance, and you have to have a doctor's note, and you have to have a dentist, and all of that. Then we have 1952, where they're like, okay, we know that this is not legal, so let's go ahead and make it legal to authorize localities to put fluoride in the drinking water. Let's make it legal for VDH to write up regulations in order to do this in a proper manner. That law never got passed. Okay, so it was never made legal, never made legal, never made legal. Then we have 73, they catch wind that Federal Safe Drinking Water Act is going to have all of these restrictions on the amount of contaminations. That comes out in 74. They know that, and at which case they vote to require water fluoridation, going directly against the current state law that requires pure water, and they're going directly against the federal government, right? Their whole point of coming up with the regulation, the Safe Drinking Water Act, is to limit the amount of contaminations. The federal government's not going to require it. Okay, just because the federal government will allow a state to pass a law doesn't mean that VDH can decide, well, we're gonna do this. It doesn't work that way. You have to have what's called statutory authority. Okay, so you have to have statutory authority in order to pass this, in order to make this regulation to say it's may required. I believe that they did this in order to be slimy, because from my experience, that's how they operate. They operate like the mafia. Okay, now I want to show you something else that's very important. Back in the 1950s, when there was a new law or regulation that was going to be passed, they were legally required to advertise this in the newspaper to give the public the opportunity to support the law or regulation, or to oppose the law and regulation. So I did find that the health department did make an advertisement in the Richmond Times-Dispatch in 73, I believe. I'm gonna have to look at this. And I'm very disturbed by this. Before we jump over to that, I just want to remind you one more time about the existing law that requires pure water. Okay, so remember, this is what we're working with right here, is they are required to have pure water. I'm not sure if I showed you this at the bottom. So according to the LIS, it was, the oldest that they have is 1950. I need to go pull the actual record from the Library of Virginia to make sure it's 1950. Okay, so let's jump over to the Richmond Times-Dispatch to see if they advertised in the newspaper that they were going to pass a regulation that may require fluoridation, that where VDH could in fact require water fluoridation. That's what they're legally obligated to do. So let's see if they actually did that. Okay, guys, so we know that Virginia Department of Health doesn't have the proper statutory authority for the regulation that may require water fluoridation, okay? But let's see if they follow this state law that required Virginia Department of Health to notify the public that the regulation was going to be put into place. Okay, so you had this law back in that was amended in 1950 that required Virginia Department of Health or whomever is going to make a new law or regulation to post it in the newspaper so people could come out and support it or come out and oppose it. Okay. So this particular notice was in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. This was September 23rd, 1973. So shortly after they voted to require water fluoridation. Okay, so they've already voted to do it anyway, and now they're going to pretend like the public has an opportunity to stop some sort of regulation. But under the law, you would have to notify the public that they are going to have a regulation where the health department could require water fluoridation. So as we're reading through this notice, ask yourself, did they notify the public that they were passing a regulation that would have required water fluoridation, where VDH could require localities to put fluoride in the drinking water? Or because fluoride is a drug, let's look and see if they put in the newspaper that VDH was going to require drugs be put into the drinking water. Okay, so let's take a gander and see. Commonwealth of Virginia State Board of Health, a legal notice of public hearing on public water supplies. Pursuant to authority vested in the State Board of Health by Title 62.1, Chapter 4, Section 62.1-46, and in accordance with the Title 9, Chapter 1.1, Code of Virginia, as amended in 1950, notice is hereby given of a public hearing by the State Board of Health to be held on October 11th, 1973 at 11 a.m. in the main floor auditorium, James Madison Building, 109 Governor Street, Richmond, Virginia. The said hearing shall consider adoption of rules and regulations of the Board of Health, Commonwealth of Virginia, governing waterworks, water supplies, and pure water within the Commonwealth. So essentially, this first bit is discussing how VDH is required to put a notice in the paper. And they're letting you know that they're going to be discussing pure water. They're not going to be discussing water fluoridation. They're not going to be discussing drugs be put in the drinking water. They're going to be discussing pure water. And anyone who has half a brain cell understands that pure water means that you're removing contaminations from the drinking water in order to make it safe to drink. So they go on to say that the regulations set forth general provisions for obtaining and revoking permits to construct and operate water works, establishes general criteria for the operation of water works, establishes criteria for bacteriological and chemical quality for pure water, sets forth procedures for elimination and control of cross contaminations, establishes the general design and construction requirements for waterworks, and I've already forgotten how to pronounce that word. Appurtenance. There too establishes general requirements for pumping facilities, storage facilities, and the distribution system. Copies of the proposed rules and regulations, we're down here, guys, available for examination by the public during regular office hours at the Bureau of Sanitary Engineering, Virginia Department of Health, 109 Governor Street, Richmond, Virginia. A copy is on file with the Division of Statutory Research and Drafting, State Capitol Building, Richmond, Virginia. A copy will also be available for examination during office hours at each of the following places. And they list Bureau of Sanitary Engineering in Arlington, Virginia, Bureau of Sanitary Engineering in Lexington, Virginia, Bureau of Sanitary Engineering in Norfolk, Virginia. So they were required to notify the public that they were going to be sneaking in this regulation regarding fluoride, right? They need to note that. Now, one might say, well, but they said that they're passing regulations about waterworks regulations, and fluoride was in the waterworks regulations. Ergo, we're good. We can green light this. I'm gonna say no, because they discuss that the waterworks regulations has to do with pure water, right? Pure water, meaning you remove contaminations from the drinking water to make the water safe to drink. Nobody would ever imagine that they were going to sneak in a regulation regarding fluoride, right? This was a big thing going on back then. People were opposed it. In fact, Richmond City Council was very against it. Lots of city council members were against it. When they finally did get it voted in at Richmond, they tried to get rid of it. This was a very hotly contested subject back in 1952. People had traditionally known fluoride as being used as a type of rat poison. So it's used to kill things. It's still to this day used to kill things. Farmers put fluoride, like a type of fluoride dust, on their crops in order to kill bugs. This kills stuff, okay? So a chemical that's designed to kill stuff, nobody would have ever thought it has anything to do with pure water, okay? It just doesn't work that way. So let's go out of this. Okay, so it's clear to me that VDH did not have the legal authority. I think that they knew they did not have the legal authority, which is why they snuck it into the waterworks regulations and why they didn't post a notice clearly, right? They're doing this under the state law that requires pure water that was passed in 1950. Now, they were foaming at the mouth in order to get localities to put fluoride in the drinking water. So that law, the 1950 pure water law, got put in place in 1950. It was still in place in 1973. Now, they knew if they thought they could require water fluoridation under that law, they would have done it prior to 1973, right? Absolutely, they would have done it. If they thought that they could require water fluoridation under that previous law, the General Assembly or the legislators wouldn't have proposed a bill that would have made this lawful, right? They would have said, we don't need to do this, it's already lawful. They didn't. Okay, if they VDH could thought that they could require water fluoridation, then why did they wait until 1973-74 when to sneak it in with this waterworks regulations and not provide the required notice, the legally required notice? Now, I'm looking through the Code of Virginia, and it appears that if a judge were to agree with me that that the public didn't get a proper notice, then this regulation would be torn down. Now, there's other avenues in order to get the courts involved. You can do an injunction saying that this is not a this current regulation does not have it's not lawful. It's unlawful. Okay. So we're up to 1973. Let's now move forward to the way that the regulation is currently written. It went from this may require language to we recommend. Now, VDH, they claim, sure, we had this may require, but they claim they never did require under that previous language, right? That's what they say to me. But I've spoken to a variety of localities, and they claim that VDH did come in and force them into it. Henrico, in particular, takes great issue to the fact that VDH is saying that it was not required. I've done a FOIA request to Virginia Department of Health asking for the documents where VDH exercised, this alleged authority of may require water fluoridation to Henrico County. So I've asked for the documents where VDH, in fact, did require Henrico, and the response has been quite frustrating. The gentleman who's answering my FOIA keeps kind of rewriting my question. He's not answering the question. This is going back and forth. I've wound up having to get several supervisors involved. So they're really trying to dance around it, and I'll show you in a later video. This video is already long enough, so we'll have to come back to this back and forth nonsense. But VDH, as it stands now, the words out of their mouth, they say they did not require it under this language. Now, I find that to be kind of cute, because if VDH never did, let's pretend like they're truthful and never made it clear that they're forcing it, and let's pretend like they didn't trick the localities into this, why did you do this? Why did you put in this may require language if you had no intent on requiring it, right? I find that to be, very peculiar. The other thing I take great issue with is this may require language that we're dealing with. Henrico County, they claim, again, that they were forced into it. The waterworks operators say that they were forced into putting fluoride in the water, that they didn't want to do it. The DPU director says, I didn't have any choice in the matter. I didn't want to do it. And then later on down the line, the county manager's office says, we didn't have a choice. Board of Supervisors say, we didn't have a choice. Okay, so up until recently, it seems like the Board of Supervisors and the county manager didn't even know that this was going on. They did not even post on their website that fluoride was in the drinking water. I get the sense that they didn't even know what fluoride was, what it does, nothing. Now, this is problematic because the fact that they put this may require nonsense in the waterworks regulations meant that all of this was being done right under the nose of the county manager and the board of supervisors. So the waterworks operators, they have to follow all of these waterworks regulations, right? And it's a ton. I mean, they have a ton of stuff that they have to understand. And so, smacked in there, you have this may require, thing. They would have thought, and this is what they claim, that they thought that they were forced to do this, that they had no choice in the matter. DPU director says, we have no choice in the matter, which means that they claim that there was never even any discussions with the county managers or the board of supervisors. The waterworks operators just did it. The DPU director just did it right under the public's nose and right under the county manager's nose, the current county manager and the past county manager, the current board of supervisors and the past board of supervisors. So I take great issue with this. Now, VDH, their position is, well, we can't help it if, they don't, if they got bamboozled. We can't help if they don't understand how it works. Like, that's on Henrico. We can't help it. Now, it's slimy. They tricked not only Henrico, but other localities in Virginia as well. So now we're going to jump into present day language for this. We've switched from may recommend, may require to recommend. So let's look at that. We're going to look to see the statutory authority once again, and we will go from there. Okay, here we go. All right, here we are at the present day language, 12 VAC 5-590-930 fluoridation. The board recommends that all community waterworks in Virginia be optimally fluoridated. Fluoridation feed systems shall be designed to deliver the optimal fluoride ion concentration as determined by the United States Department of Health and Human Services. There's a variety of issues with this. We've gone over it in the past, so if you're not familiar, then go check out the past video. So we are left with recommends, right? And what is the statutory authority that they point to? It's interesting because when I asked the Office of Drinking Water, why do you think that you have the lawful authority to do this? They refuse to cite these codes. And I basically did a Freedom of Information Act request in order to get them to say, what are you guys pointing to as your as the legal authority? They did not want to. They just did not want to say. Now let's go check it out. Why wouldn't they want to say? Oh, it's because they don't have any statutory authority. They're required to ensure pure water. Ding, ding, ding. So they know that what they are doing is not lawful. They know that they do not possess the statutory authority, and yet they recklessly continue to recommend water fluoridation anyway. And they want to pretend like this recommendation confers some sort of has some sort of teeth to it when it doesn't. This whole thing is meaningless. The whole system is built on a house of cards. Okay, so there we have it. You can decide for yourself if VDH actually possesses the authority to recommend or may require. Okay, if you disagree with me, be sure to leave a comment below and explain yourself and cite your sources. Okay, before we jump into now Henrico and their egregious nonsense, I do want to make a point that I went to the VDH quarterly meeting a few days ago. It was on March 19th, I believe was the date. And I gave my 2-minute speech, and maybe I'll share with you the 2-minute speech now that you're caught up. It'll make sense to you. And after the speech, I asked a variety of the board members, why are they recommending water fluoridation given that a federal judge has ruled this poses an unreasonable risk of injury? It damages the brain, and the best kind of comparison that I can have is like lead. So lead reduces your IQ and damages the brain, and so does fluoride. There's more evidence that fluoride damages the brain than there is of lead. We've gotten rid of lead, so let's get rid of fluoride. I also asked, why are you doing this? Because I warned you guys in 2024 that this was problematic. You ignored me, and then more than a month's worth of fluoride went into the drinking water in Richmond in 5 hours and 15 minutes. Like, you're responsible. You have a duty of care. You knew this was harmful. You knew that there was risk, and you recommended it anyway. So while I was there in person speaking with a variety of board members and said, why are you recommending this? Why are you recommending this? You saw the language. It says the board recommends. Not a single board member said that they recommended it. In fact, they consistently said, I do not recommend this. I am not recommending this. And I said, well, the regulation says the board recommends. You're part of the board. So, on paper, legally speaking, you're recommending it, right? They said, no, I don't recommend it. One gentleman in particular, I believe it was the chair, he must have told me 4 or 5 times, I'm not recommending this. I'm not recommending it. I'm not recommending it. I'm not recommending it. I'm not recommending it. Okay, well, that makes the situation even worse. So over the last year, I've now spoken to, I would say, roughly 10 board members. And all 10 board members that I spoke to said, I am not recommending this. Many of them did not know what fluoride was, what fluoride does. They did not know the adverse events, nothing. Now, why is this problematic? Because Henrico, who's secretly putting this into the drinking water, when I say, why are you doing this? They said, because the board recommends it. The Virginia Department of Health board recommends it. I have yet to find a board member that recommends this. So sure, on paper, it says the board recommends, but in reality, they all say, I'm not recommending this. It's not me. I'm not doing it. Come on, folks. What are you doing? What are you doing leaving this regulation in place when you're not recommending it, right? It's egregious. It is reckless disregard of human health. They know what they're doing, and they decide that they don't want to do anything about it anyway. And here's the other issue that I have. Let me not overstate this. I've now spoken to, I would say, at least 4 to 5 VDH employees. Several board members said, well, if you don't like this egregious recommendation, where we don't have the statutory authority to do this, and it's harming children, if you don't like it, then you need to file a petition, right, to have the regulation changed. Well, one, that's what I show up in person, and that's me petitioning them, and I give it to them in writing, and that's me petitioning them. So I've already done this. Two, the petition that they have is a petition to either create a new regulation, which is not what I'm trying to do, or amend a regulation, which is not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to amend this regulation. It needs to be torn up. I'm claiming that this is an unlawful regulation and that essentially it needs to be nullified. Okay. So I take great issue with the fact that they get all smug and say, well, there's a little process that you can go with if you don't like it and do this, have this amended. What? What are you talking about? And then they say that the responsibility is on me to protect public health. So they recognize that there's no safe level. They recognize that it causes harm. Okay, many of them recognize that it causes harm to your teeth. They recognize it causes harm to the brain. They recognize there's no safe level. They recognize that they themselves don't recommend it. And they recognize that there's fluoride overflows that happened in Richmond and all over Virginia, and that this is problematic and it harms human health. They recognize that they have a duty of care to protect the public health, but they say it's on me. This is the equivalent of the board recommending that little children run out and do a line of coke, and I say, hey, this recommendation, it's a bad idea for y'all to be recommending this, and they say, well, yeah, we don't really recommend it, and we think it's nonsensical, and we recognize it's harming human health, but it's on you in order to stop us. They're the ones that are recommending the drugs, that are recommending mass medicating the people against their will, but it's on you, right? That's what they're saying. Anyway, let me not go too much off on a tangent. I think I will go ahead and show you guys the 2-minute speech that I gave a few days ago to the board. It just makes me so upset in order to think about how these people, this is medical tyranny. I don't know how else to put it. It's medical tyranny. So I will read you the speech. I did have positive interactions afterwards. The health commissioner was very interested and engaged in a decent conversation. It was funny because after I gave my speech, he came over and I shook his hand, and I was so happy to meet him. And we were having a discussion, and boy, were people circling him. Like, he didn't realize he's not supposed to talk to me. He's a lawyer. So I thought, this would be a no-brainer. He can just see there's no statutory authority. But boy, were they circling him. And one woman came over and told the commissioner, we need to go take pictures. And I'm sure I looked at her like, I was like, what are you doing? We are here to talk about public health. That's what we're here for. The public is here and to explain what's going on, and you're supposed to advocate for us, and you're worried about photos. Children's brains are being harmed, and you're worried about photos right now. Can't you do that at a different time? When the public didn't come out, and it's just egregious. These people are egregious. So I'll share with you my 2-minute speech, and then we'll wrap up this little discussion with Henrico and how they don't have the lawful authority now that we've already established that there's no statutory authority for VDH to make this recommendation. So let's get into that real quick and move on along. Okay, here we go. Whew. In 1950, a law was passed to ensure pure water in the Commonwealth. That law stands today. 32.1-170 regulations states the regulations of the board governing waterworks, water supplies, and pure water shall be designed to protect the public health. Using the best interpretation doctrine, it's clear that the intent of this law is to remove contaminations from the water to make it safe to drink. Nowhere in this pure water law does it say that the board shall govern fluoridation. If the legislature wanted to allow localities in Virginia to use the waterworks as a mechanism to mass medicate the public, then they would have passed this bill in 1952. The General Assembly did not pass this bill. Instead, the legislators stuck with the law that promoted pure water. The legislators chose laws that treated water, not people. This means that 12 VAC 5-590-930 fluoridation, which describes the board recommending fluoridation, is an unlawful regulation that needs to be nullified immediately. Recommending fluoridation after a federal judge ruled it to be an unreasonable risk is reckless disregard. In 2025, more than a month's worth of fluoride was released into the drinking water in a matter of hours. You knew the risks and you recommended it anyway. That's child abuse. You're responsible for protecting public health, not exceeding authority. Tear up this regulation before more people get hurt. Thank you. Okay, so that was the speech that I gave to Virginia Department of Health. I try to deliver it with the same, vim and vigor that I did the other day. I delivered it with a bit more contempt in my voice the other day because I didn't appreciate the material that they were providing earlier. So by the time I got up to speak, I was kind of ticked off, to say the least bit. So, okay, we've established that Virginia Department of Health does not possess the lawful authority to recommend this. We've established that I've spoken to, like I said, somewhere around 10 board members, and all of them say, no, I'm not recommending it. I'm not recommending it. Sure, that regulation says the board recommends it, but I don't recommend it. I've yet to find a board member that recommends it. So, okay, so we've established that. If you guys disagree with me in the comments and you think that somehow magically the law that requires pure water means that you put drugs in the drinking water that causes disfigurement of your teeth and that damages the brain and the thyroid, then please feel free to respond, do so, if you guys are in the comments, like duke it out nicely if you could. So, but I encourage the debate. Now let's pivot to Henrico. So I contend that no locality in Virginia has the authority to put fluoride in the drinking water. But what about Henrico? Now, like I mentioned before, Henrico was bamboozled and thought that they were supposed to do this. They claim that VDH has required them in the past. VDH denies it. I've yet to get the FOIA that really nails it down, because the gentleman keeps rewriting my FOIA. For example, he says, well, he won't, when I say the documents where VDH required it, he says, well, in the Office of Drinking Water file, we didn't require it. So in other words, if it's in this, it's not in this file, but it could be in this file or this file or this file. And if you want us to check it, it's going to cost you something like over $9,000. And by the way, he rewrote it so he'll give me information where they suggested that fluoride was required. I'm not looking for their manipulative language where they suggested it was required. I already know that. I'm looking for the language where they in fact did require it. So I'll fill you in on that one when I get it back. Okay, so Henrico was tricked. That's established. So once Henrico realized that this was the case, which they did not realize this until I came along, they were adamant. We don't have a choice. We don't want to do fluoride, but we don't have a choice. VDH is forcing us. Da 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 da. Okay, we finally have established VDH right now. With the way the regulation is written, it's recommends, right? So I said, okay, now you don't have the statutory authority and you don't have an ordinance. You have to have an ordinance and you have to have statutory authority in order to have that ordinance. You don't have anything. You have no ordinance. Even if you did have an ordinance, you don't have any statutory authority. You don't have statutory authority to do this without an ordinance. Nothing. You've got nothing. And so Henrico, last time I spoke at the last meeting I went to, it was Jody Rogish's Tuckahoe Talk. And I asked one question. I asked if he knew what the Dillon Rule was. And he proudly answered, yes. Yes, of course he knows what the Dillon Rule is. Right? And he pushed that was easy button. Now, why would I ask that question? Because under the Dillon Rule, localities only have the authority to do an action if there's a state law that allows them to do it. Okay, so if Henrico is going to put fluoride in the drinking water, there must be a state law that allows the localities to put it in the drinking water. So you saw in that 1952 bill, the bill would have allowed localities to put it in the drinking water, and then it would have allowed VDH to make regulations regarding fluoride, right? That's what they would have had to have done. There's no state law that allows water fluoridation. So I would like to show you what the Dillon Rule is, and then we can kind of go from there, okay? Ask yourself, while you're thinking about this, is there a clearly established law that allows us? So it's just as simple as that. Okay, here we are. So there are 3 elements to the Dillon Rule. Now, this is not a law. What this is, it's a sort of precedent that has been set to limit what the local government can do. And essentially what it means is that the local government can only do what the General Assembly allows them to do. So, for example, Henrico can only put fluoride in the drinking water if there is a law that the General Assembly granted that expressly states that fluoride can go into the drinking water, right? That 1952 proposed bill would have satisfied this, but they did not pass that bill. That bill never got turned into a law. Clearly, right now, we're working with the law that requires pure water. So is there a state law that clearly says that Henrico County can put fluoride in the drinking water? The answer is no. Is there a state law that essentially implies that fluoride can go into the drinking water? And the term that they use is necessarily implied. So, in other words, when you read the law that discusses pure water, do you see anywhere in there where well, you have to put fluoride in the drinking water, and it's implied that you have to do it in order to get pure water. No, so it is not necessarily implied. And number three is those that are absolutely essential to the government's declared purpose. The government's declared purpose for that pure water law that I've referenced is to remove contaminations from the drinking water to make it safe to drink. And so, no, fluoride is not essential to in order to achieve the purpose of safe drinking water. And this can be proven out in a variety of ways, but one easy way to prove it is that Henrico chose to stop adding fluoride to the drinking water for nearly a year in 2024. The water's still safe to drink. Approximately 50% of the waterworks in the U.S. no longer have fluoride in the drinking water. 2 states banned fluoride, so you cannot say that it is essential, okay, in order to for the purpose of that pure water law. Okay, there we have it. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. We've got a corrupt state and we have a corrupt county, in my opinion. You let me know what you think. So, we've gone over just about everything I could possibly think of when it comes to the legislative authority. I do not believe that VDH has the legislative authority or the legislative backing to recommend, require nothing. And I do not believe that Henrico has the legal authority to put fluoride in the drinking water. What they're doing is particularly egregious. They're doing it in secret. They omitted the fact that it was in the water in 2024 when they knew that they were putting it in for that short period of time. If they didn't notify the public that they were putting it in, they did not even give 90-day notice. That in itself is illegal on so many different levels, but maybe they'll say, no, we just, equipment broke or something like that. They chose to stop putting it in. Yes, a piece of equipment broke, but then they chose not to fix the equipment because they didn't want it. So they chose to stop. Now, the last element of this is there a crime in here? Now, there's a variety of laws that could come into play, that it's a possibility that they could come into play. But being that the Henrico Board of Supervisors is discussing the budget right now, and they're going to allow public comment soon to discuss the budget, I want to talk about, is it a crime to spend, assuming that what they're doing is unlawful, right? Assuming that they do not have the legal authority to put fluoride in the drinking water, then is it illegal for them to spend our tax money on an unlawful fluoridation program? I believe that it is, and I believe that I found several laws that apply. So we'll just end on that note. It's kind of heavy. Several of them are felonies. And so you always want to be careful about accusing somebody of a crime. I am saying everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and that we'll just say, for the sake of this conversation, that this is a thought exercise, and that I am not accusing anyone at this point of committing the various crimes that could potentially arise if somebody is engaging in an unlawful act. So the alleged information going forward is alleged. Okay, so there's the disclosure. Don't come for me, guys. I mean, how about we just stop drugging people against their consent and we don't have to continue to talk about this? But anyway, so let's end on that note and we will wrap it up. It's been a big video. It's been a big day. Okay. All right, let's look at the beginning. So this is a legal analysis of unlawful expenditure of public funds allegedly by Henrico County. Okay, assuming that we are correct. So this would be for the members of the board, and it says, under Virginia law, Henrico County cannot spend taxpayer money on a program it has no legal authority to fund. This is not just a policy argument, it's a legal requirement, okay? You must have the lawful authority in order to spend taxpayer money. You can't just spend it on whatever you feel like it. So there's no statutory authority. 32.1-170 of the Code of Virginia empowers the board to regulate waterworks and water quality to ensure pure water. Okay, now when they say the board, this is the VDH board. So I go on to say the statute is limited to removing contaminants and ensuring safe drinking water. It does not authorize fluoridation, nor does it allow localities to treat citizens via water systems. Under the Dillon Rule, local governments like Henrico County only have powers that are expressly granted, necessarily implied, or essential. Fluoridation meets none of these standards. 2. No ordinance. Henrico County has not enacted an ordinance authorizing fluoridation. Public funds cannot legally be spent on activities lacking both statutory and local legislative authority. 3. Virginia criminal statutes. Virginia law makes it a crime for public officials to misuse public funds or public assets. 18.2-112, embezzlement by public officials, makes it a crime if any official, agent, or employee of the Commonwealth or of any political subdivision knowingly misuses or disposes of public funds otherwise than in accordance with law. He shall be guilty of a Class 4 felony. You must act within law, and there is no law allowing Henrico County to put fluoride in the drinking water. There is no ordinance allowing Henrico to put fluoride in the drinking water. There must be a law and an ordinance. Okay, 18.2-112.1, misuse of public assets. Any full-time officer, agent, or employee of a county who, without thoughtful authorization, uses or permits the use of public assets for purposes unrelated to legitimate government duties is guilty of a Class 4 felony if the value exceeds $1,000 in a 12-month period. Application to Henrico. Henrico County has no statutory authority for fluoridation. Henrico County has no ordinance authorizing expenditures for fluoridation. Yet, taxpayer funds are being used to support this program. If these expenditures were made knowingly, the actions could satisfy the criminal elements under 18.2-112 and 18.2-112.1, specifically misusing public funds otherwise than in accordance with law, and using public assets without lawful authorization. Conclusion. Henrico County must immediately cease spending taxpayer money on fluoridation. Continuing this program without statutory or local authority not only violates the Dillon Rule and 15.2-950 lawful appropriations, but could also expose responsible officials to criminal liability under Virginia law. Actions required: halt all fluoridation expenditures immediately, repeal or rescind any administrative recommendations or programs that lack legal authority, and 3, align all future public spending with statutory and local ordinances. And there we go. And I went ahead and cited the law, so you can pause the video if you like and read this. Here's the second one. Again, pause the video. And the third. Okay, so that's it. I find it interesting that the public is required to know and understand the law, right? They say ignorance of the law is no excuse. The public's required in order to understand the law. But then when we do understand the law, and then we tell these politicians who are these little puppet masters, right, that they are violating the law, they say, "Who are you? Who are you?" Well, I'm somebody who's, possesses reading comprehension. That's who I am. But they find it inconceivable that us mere peasants, us serfs, could actually navigate the system, right? Because they see us as just nothing, right? That was clear when I was over at the VDH board. The board members seemed really gobsmacked that I would approach them and ask, "Why are you recommending this?" They seem to be confused that, like, as if we're not supposed, like, the public isn't supposed to interact with them. 2 board members in particular said the meeting was adjourned, and they said, "I'm not allowed to speak to you. I'm not allowed to speak." And I'll have to go into those conversations in a later video. This video is already long enough. But essentially, they feel somebody is controlling these people, okay? Now, both men claimed that it was the chair who was controlling them and forbidding them from speaking. The chair denied this. But they are not, they're not free, I guess I should say. They are not free to speak. Now, some of the newer board members, they hadn't gotten the memo that, you're supposed to be, managed and controlled, like you have a handler. So they were more interested and wanted to engage, and I've since spoken with some other people. But it's astounding that really it's powerful people with powerful money dictating our health. It was clear that the board has no earthly idea what they're doing as it relates to water fluoridation. They don't understand the adverse events. They don't understand what it is. They think it's naturally occurring. They don't know anything. And yet, us as citizens are allowing them to cast a vote and dictate this. I mean, it was very, very disturbing that the health department is this ill-informed and has this level of power. I think that everyone should be terrified And I encourage you to make phone calls to the board. If you are displeased, email the board. If you are displeased, show up at the meeting. This is the only process that we have. So keep using your voice, because if you don't, they will take it away from you. Okay. So that is all. I think this was a great, I guess lesson, the best that I can say today. And yeah, so stay tuned. Make sure that if you like the video, give a thumbs up. Make sure to leave a comment below and share it with others. And I will see you on the flip side. Got a lot more to share with you. Been busy. Bye guys. See you next time.